What is up, guys? Welcome to my review for the latest entry to the DC Extended Universe, and that is Shazam. This video will contain spoilers, so beware of that if you haven't seen the movie. If you haven't, then you should probably click off this video, go watch it, and then come back. But if you just don't care about spoilers, then just stick around till the end of the video just to find out what the score is. But anyway, getting into the review, right off the bat, I have to say that Shazam is one of the funniest superhero movies I have ever seen from beginning until end, except for maybe, not really the beginning, because the movie does start with the beginnings of Dr. Savannah's origin story, but after that, and all the way until the end, except for certain scenes that are not meant to be funny, this movie is hilarious. There are, maybe one or two jokes that don't really nail, but the rest of it are definitely really funny. Most of the comedy derives from looking at superheroes with a humorous lens, or interactions, or situations that these characters are put in, and I don't think that would work if we didn't really grow to like these characters. And I think that this movie did a great job of establishing these characters and did a great job at making them very likable, and therefore the comedy definitely landed as well. So I do think that one of the best things about this movie is the comedy, and I don't generally like comedies. I go to superhero movies not necessarily for the comedy, but I think that because the comedy worked so well for this movie, it is probably the best part about it, which makes it so damn good. But obviously just comedy would not be enough for a movie to make it a good movie. It would be a funny movie, but not necessarily a good movie. Thankfully, like I said, this movie does have some really good characters. Mainly it's Billy and Freddy, as well as Shazam, because Billy and Shazam do kind of feel like two separate characters. They have kind of distinct personalities, which I think doesn't bother me, because it would make sense that a kid would have a different personality if he changed into an adult body with superpowers as well as a superhero costume. I think that it makes sense that his personality changed a little bit, but he also definitely feels like two different characters at the same time. But all three of these characters, Billy, Freddy, and Shazam, really hold up this movie, and because of that, the comedy lands. Because of that, you grow to care about these characters and their struggles, as well as the rest of the family. So I do think that those are the two best things about this movie, the comedy as well as the main characters. So this movie showed Shazam's origin story, which it's been a while since it actually had an origin story in a DC movie. It's been 2 years, which is the Wonder Woman movie, and that was only the second origin story movie we saw in this universe. I don't necessarily have a problem with origin story movies. I think that people have kind of grown tired of them because they have this formulaic feel to them, and it doesn't feel like the movie gets going until the character becomes the superhero. But I never disliked origin story movies at all, and I think Shazam does a great job with the origin story. It's basically beat for beat the exact same thing as the comic it's based off of, which is the original New 52 Shazam run, or the first volume of the New 52. Basically, this movie is the exact same thing as that one, except this movie doesn't have Black Adam, except for one indirect mention of the character, which I did think was a great mention of Black Adam, or indirect one. Obviously, when Shazam the Wizard showed this whole animation of his first champion, and that was obviously Black Adam. We definitely will see him in the second or third movie, or the sequel of Shazam. But I do really like his origin story. I like how they told it in this movie. Again, it's very, very similar to the comic, and I do like that a lot. It's very comic book accurate. I do think they did a great job with that, to the point where when he did become Shazam, it was very, very exciting. I think the movie did a great job at building up to that moment, and after that, everything after that was so funny, so entertaining, and also just so fun to watch. During that origin story that I just talked about, Billy Batson was adopted by this foster family that had a bunch of different kids a part of it. I really liked how they introduced these kids, and I think Freddy was, again, Billy, and Shazam really carried this movie, and I think Freddy was easily the funniest character in this movie, and he was just such a great character. I think the kid who played him did such a great job in the role. I think the kid who played Billy was also pretty good, but the kid who played Freddy was really, really good in this role. He was hilarious. He really did this role very, very well. So I really liked all the interactions between them, and this movie had this subplot of the family drama. It wasn't really a subplot because it led into the ending where, spoiler alert, again, this is a spoiler full review, so not exactly a spoiler alert, but in the end, the Marvel family, which is Shazam as well as the rest of his foster family, becoming these other Captain Marvels, or these other Shazams. They don't really have names in this movie, but anyway, that obviously all this family drama of Billy not really wanting to be a part of any family, and then learning to become become part of this family. That was obviously the main storyline of everything to do with the family drama, which I think they did a pretty good job at leading up to the ending with the Marvel family, and I will get to that later, but the Marvel family showing up was not unexpected because I think it was spoiled through some toy line, but it definitely was a very awesome moment in that movie, or in this movie, and I think the family drama definitely did a good job at setting that up. I don't think this movie spent enough time on showing Billy not really wanting to be a part of the family or learning to become a part of the family. It really feels like he just bonded with Freddy, which is good. I think he became really good friends with Freddy, but the rest of the family didn't seem like he spent enough time with them, except for at the end of the movie. This is a minor complaint because I do think that is not exactly a major aspect of the movie that needed to happen, but at the same time, it is definitely something that bothered me just a little bit. So the main villain of this movie is Dr. Savannah, as well as the 7 Deadly Sins. I really like the connection between Dr. Savannah and why Shazam became Shazam, or why Billy became Shazam, because the Shazam, the wizard, only chose Billy because he was pretty desperate because Dr. Savannah was chosen as the champion of the 7 Deadly Sins. For some reason, I really like it when the villains starting to plan creates the hero that would eventually stop them. I really like that the whole trope in superhero movies. I can't really think of anything off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure it's been done before, and I really like it when that happens. But this movie, Dr. Savannah, I don't think he was a great villain for the most part, but he did actually become a pretty good villain in the end. I think he had a pretty good backstory with everything connected to his brother and his father, as well as the fact that he was chosen by the Shazam, the wizard. And I think, again, I like the connection between Dr. Savannah and Shazam and why both of them became who they were in the end. I think his powers, although I don't think he has powers in the comics. In fact, I know he does not have powers in the comics. It makes sense that they gave it to him because this movie did not include Black Adam, because the comic it's based off did, and I'm glad it didn't, because that comic was very stuffed with 9 different villains, while this one only had 8, which the 7 Deadly Sins, not exactly 7 different villains, they're really just one villain, especially when they're all connected to Dr. Savannah, so I'm glad they did not include Black Adam in this movie, and they definitely could in a second or third installment of what would probably become the Shazam trilogy. But Dr. Savannah, I think that he had a lot of good things about him. Again, his backstory, as well as his motivation, as well as that one moment where he showed up in his father's company and he just took his brother and threw him out the window. That was a crazy moment. I think that the way they shot it was just so insane, and it was crazy. I think that moment alone was probably the best moment of Dr. Savannah, and it made him look so menacing. And then after that, when all of the 7 Deadly Sins came out, and obviously after that, when Dr. Savannah fought Shazam, I think that he was a pretty good villain, but he definitely was a little bit cliche or a little bit villain-esque. Like, there wasn't a lot about him that separated him from most other superhero villains, but for the most part, I think that he was definitely pretty good. In terms of the 7 Deadly Sins, I'm kind of torn about these characters because on the one hand, they are very different from how they are in the comics. They're a lot less colorful and a lot less distinct from each other, which, again, on the one hand, I don't like because it makes them a lot more boring as characters. But on the other hand, I'm kind of glad they kept it like that, or they changed it to being this boring gray villains, because it is a little bit scarier in these moments. And also, if they were this colorful and distinct from each other, they might overshadow Dr. Savannah, which would make it feel like you wouldn't really know who the main villain is. In this movie, it's very clear it's Dr. Savannah, who gets his powers from the 7 Deadly Sins, so I have really no complaints about how they handled those characters in this movie, because in the end, the big fight scene, or the big climax and conclusion to this movie of Dr. Savannah facing off against Shazam, as well as the 7 Deadly Sins facing off against who would become the Marvel family, it was definitely a great ending to this movie. Now, one thing I didn't love about this movie was the fight scenes, as well as the visuals. Now, I will say right off the bat, not exactly the biggest complaint about this movie, because the fight scenes and the visuals were not exactly the point. The point was more the characters, the comedy, and the family aspect of the characters, but I think that just the fact that it lacked the visuals and the fight scenes makes it a little bit worse than it could have been, and I blame it on the budget. It feels like this movie definitely had a much smaller budget than most superhero movies this year, and that's just because comedies typically don't have big budgets, and I understand that, but I think this movie could have had a little bigger of a budget to make the visuals visuals and the CGI way better. I mean, compared to Aquaman, I mean, I'm not really comparing the two because it's obvious this movie was more about comedy, that movie was more about the visuals, but compared to Aquaman, this movie has no distinct visual aspect about it, and the CGI doesn't look great for the most part. I think that some of the fight scenes are good, but for the most part, it's not very good, and the fact that it mostly takes place in the dark or in the night at the end is not a great visual feast for me, and I typically do like visuals and CGI and stuff like that more than comedy and superhero movies, but again, that's not what they're going for, and I totally get it, and I like the diversity in the movies. You go from this big CGI, insane visual movie with, I think, great music as well, to this movie which is better characters as well as it's way funnier than Aquaman was, and I love that diversity in the last two movies, and I also gotta say that I think DC has been killing it lately. The last two DC movies are way better than the last two Marvel movies, but that will probably change after Endgame. One last note about this movie is that I think that better than any DC movie in the past, this movie uses the DC universe so incredibly well with the different characters that exist in this universe, the different superheroes that are constantly mentioned, like Superman and Batman. You also have subtle references to Wonder Woman, I think, and also The Flash. You see some toys about The Flash as well. I love all of these references. You also obviously have a huge reference to Aquaman right at the end, where they just basically say what happened in the Aquaman movie right at the end, and I love how they connected all these movies with this movie. This universe felt very disjointed from each other in the past, but this movie makes it feel like all these characters still exist in this universe, and Superman even appears in a scene that I don't know how they would explain that canonically with this movie, like is Shazam a part of the Justice League or something at this point in the scene? I don't know, honestly, but I think this movie, better than any movie in the past in this universe, uses the DC universe and incorporates characters without actually using those characters. Like, obviously Superman appeared without showing his face. You have the batarangs, you have a bullet that had hit Superman. There's also some Superman and Batman and Flash toys. I didn't really see any Wonder Woman or Cyborg toys or even Aquaman, but I'm sure they did appear somewhere in the background. I just love how they incorporated all the characters or just the universe in this movie way better than they did in any other movie in this universe in the past. I kind of felt like DCEU was dead. Even after Aquaman, I felt like they only really had Aquaman, but after this movie kind of rejuvenated my interest in this universe outside of the characters that are now getting good movies. Like, I'm now more interested in Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Flash, and Cyborg than I was before this movie came out because of all the small references as well as huge references to these characters and the incorporation of the characters and the universe into this movie. I think that is, again, one of the best parts of this movie, and also one of the best parts is Mr. Mind, who shows up occasionally in this movie, who is one of the silliest, craziest villains that I'm kind of excited to see in the sequel, but I'm hoping one thing that happens in the sequel is that Mr. Mind is built up on the posters and the trailers, and in this movie as well, he shows up and then he's just stepped on by Black Adam, who shows up as the main villain of the second movie. I think that would be hilarious, and it's definitely something I would not mind to see in the second movie. I think that it's kind of something that they kind of can do, and they just might with Mr. Mind and Black Adam. In conclusion, Shazam might not have the greatest visuals or fight scenes, but it makes up for it tenfold with the humor, characters, as well as the incorporation of the DC Extended Universe into this movie. There are so many great things about this movie: the telling of Shazam's origin story, that connecting to the main villain of the movie, and the Marvel family showing up in the end. The lack of good visuals, good CGI, and good fight scenes is not really noticed for the most part because of everything that makes this movie so good, so I will give it a 9.2 out of 10. But let me know what you thought about Shazam in the comments down below, as well as in the poll in the top right corner of the video. And if you like this video, make sure to leave a like, share, and subscribe. And thanks for watching.